Pets are animals that are not delicious. I don't think that was by mistake. I think we probably tried to eat all of them. Like, okay, these don't taste good, so we'll give these first names and sweaters and we'll hang out with them. And then let's eat the rest. Let's eat these. We even eat birds. I can't believe we eat birds. How did that start? Somebody's like, you see that flying up there? I want to put that in my mouth. Yeah, that looks good. It's covered in feathers. No. Do it, I'll make it good. I think we're mean to birds, man. I mean, turkeys, we break the wishbone. We've killed the bird. We've cooked it and we've eaten it. Then we're like, you want to break its bones, man? Yeah, let's break his bones, man. We'll make a wish.
Now I feel bad about the wishbone. I won't do that anymore on Thanksgiving. Chris Paulson is joining me. I'm Don Rosen. I want to thank you for joining us here on WRJN this morning. One quick look at the weather. A little drizzle now and 47 degrees. Gradual clearing, though, today with a high near 46. Tonight, it looks like, a clear sky. Lows around 32. I got to bring the paper up to my face now. Those days are coming quickly. Tomorrow, sunny with a high near 52. Sunday, sunny with a high near 51. Do we dare check Thanksgiving Day? Sunny with a high near 31. It is 6:07 at WRJN. As I mentioned, Chris Paulson is here. Chris is the executive director of the Racine Heritage Museum. And those three words kind of say it all. Racine, heritage is history, and the museum is the keeping of all the history. So you got all three in one shot there. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me.
A wealth of history. I love going back and looking at what was done before I was on this planet. And there's so much of it. And you guys put together a wonderful museum. It's right there on Main Street. Now, what's the exact address?
701 Main Street.
701. Okay, so it's right there at 7th and Main. You walk in, and it's just there's exhibits everywhere. Why don't you tell us when did the museum come to be?
Well, our legal incorporated name is the Racine County Historical Society and Museum. We operate as Racine Heritage Museum, but our collection and our programming cover all of Racine County history. The organization dates to about 1870 when it was organized as the Old Settler Society, the group of folks who kind of came in and created the community we live in now, who wanted to preserve their story. And that organization over the years evolved into the Racine County Historical Society and eventually into the museum we have today. The collection in our care spans roughly 200,000 objects and over 6,500 linear feet of original source documentary material, all the record of the people of Racine County over the past 170 years, 180 years.
You know, I found something interesting. I'm just going to say it now because I'll forget later on. The first mayor of Racine was... The first mayor of Racine, I forgot his name all of a sudden. Just came to me and I forgot it. He was buried in, I think, Graceland or Mound Cemetery. And for
Mound.
And for decades, he had no headstone. Until not too long ago, I guess they put the headstone on there. People donated money. And it's hard to believe. That's a bit of our history there. The first mayor of Racine. I can't remember his name.
There are people buried in Mount Cemetery. There are folks that served in the Revolutionary War that are buried there too as well. It's an amazing place to just take a walk through and look at the names, look at the dates, and the stories are unbelievable. There's a really good guide to it that they have there too.
We went through. He's not the guide anymore, but he was the guide for the cemetery at one time, and I can't remember his name.
Steve Bedard.
And he told us some fascinating. Actually, I didn't go with him. I watched his video of.
Yeah, there's a documentary that was produced,
and I watched the video of it. Where I'm going to be buried someday. An American Revolutionary War vet is buried there as well, out in Union Grove. So that right in front of our graves is a Packer Hall of Famer Actually, he's in the Packer Fan Hall of Fame.
Oh, I've read about him.
Yeah, so he's good. If you want to see our grave someday, stand at his grave, take 2 steps back, 4 steps to the left, and you'll be standing on me. So tell us about some of the exhibits there at the Racine Heritage Museum.
Well, currently we do have 3 floors of exhibits. We have. We can talk about some of the larger ones, but we just on Tuesday night with the 3rd graders at Prairie School opened a brand new exhibit that they help curate with our educator at the museum, and it's just a fun process. They have a wonderful exhibit opening. The kids worked on just kind of interpreting Racine history through its maps. They use maps to kind of show locations, to show an industry, to show just really cool historic sites around the community. And it's a really neat exhibit. And it's only up for a few months, and I really would love for people to come and see what these kids have done. In June, we opened. We did a major renovation to our central gallery, and thanks to a wonderful person, Tim Samuelson, he's the cultural historian for the city of Chicago, brought in an absolutely spectacular collection of early Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, and other materials that, when we tell the story of Frank Lloyd Wright, his early career and his relationship with a now long-forgotten architect, Cecil Corwin. Cecil was a mentor to Wright and a fellow apprentice under Sullivan, and they worked together in private practice after leaving the apprenticeship, and were dear friends. Frank Lloyd Wright referred to him as his dearest friend in his biography many years later. Corwin. His father at the time was the pastor of First Presbyterian Church, and while there's a number of Corwin designs that Frank Lloyd Wright actually did the work on when he was bootlegging, when he wasn't supposed to be moonlighting as an apprentice. There is a Corwin designed house in Racine, right down the street from the museum, the Henry Mitchell House at 8th and Main. And for a long time there was some debate on whether or not that might be one of those Wright designs that Corwin's name was on. But regardless of that, and that's the two of them worked together for well over a decade and certainly influenced each other's work. And it's not resolved, but it's probably just a Corwin design anyway. But a beautiful home, and it's really cool to kind of pull together some of the Racine connections to Wright at this time, and to learn more about this forgotten architect, Cecil Corwin, and start to understand and showcase the work that he did.
And there are a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright designs all around town. You can see them. There's one south of you.
Yes, right. There are several Wright design buildings that actually span the entire course of his career. If the Hardy House down on South Main is an earlier Wright, but I
went through there. Yeah,
beautiful. The restoration is gorgeous. The Mitchell House, while it is a Corwin design, really is something. There are Wright designs in the Chicago area that look very, very similar. They were designing and they were using the skills that they had learned, the design skills that they had picked up from working for Louis Sullivan. So they do look a lot alike. So you can actually kind of use that as a kind of a jumping off point for early Wright, and of course you can go all the way through to the Johnson buildings, which were later in Wright's career.
I went through the house on South Main, and I don't know why, but I had to keep ducking when you're tall too, and the ceilings are not that high. Everything is at a square angle. They're very squarish in the house. It's a beautiful home. Mm-hmm. We went through, what's that thing they have in September, the Parade of Homes?
Yes, that's Preservation Racine.
Right, went through the Parade of Homes. And by the way, I got to tell you, next year, go through the Parade of Homes. They pick some very interesting homes to go through. And these people are so nice to let people go schlepping through their homes. And I don't know if I would do that, but they put together a beautiful Parade of Homes every year. So I suggest you do that. You get a little bit of history of Racine. When I went through there, some of the flashier exhibits catch your eye, and one is the Racine Bells. The women's baseball team during World War II. If you saw the movie A League of Their Own, you know a lot of the men went off to war, and they still wanted to continue baseball, so they started a women's league. And a lot of the teams were here in the Midwest, and one of them was the Racine team, which when the war was over kind of disbanded because the guys were back from the war and they formed baseball again. But you have a great exhibit. You have some good pieces there.
We do. We had the good fortune of, early in my career, I've been at the museum now for 34, going on 35 years. And early in the 90s, there were several members of the Racine Bells that were still around. And I had the opportunity to interview them. We actually provided a number of the images that are used at least in the end credits of the movie that you referenced. And we were able to collect a good story of the Bells. Just get some good firsthand interviews out of that stuff. There's a pretty good collection of material, and we have yearbooks and all sorts of things. The Bells were an amazing team. They were the league was organized in 1942, I think. So I started playing in 1943 by Mr. Wrigley in Chicago. We needed some folks to fill the stadiums, and there were seven teams that were, as you said, around the Midwest, and the Bells were an outstanding championship team. They just have an incredible story. They're part of the reason that Horlick Field is such an iconic place. It's I
know the history of Horlick Field in itself is amazing.
So that story is showcased in our Sports Hall of Fame exhibit, which is a core exhibit for the museum every year for the past since 2011. We've had an induction event where we bring in stories of outstanding athletes. And tell those, and our athletic story in this community throughout Racine County is absolutely mind-blowing. And these people are, and the teams and the beloved coaches and the commitments and the way that they reflect the community is utterly remarkable.
Hold it there. I want to talk more about the sports exhibit at the Racine Heritage Museum coming up. My guest is Chris Paulson. He is the executive director of the Racine Heritage Museum right here on Main Street in Racine. Looking for a gradual clearing today. A little drizzle now. Gradual clearing, highs near 46 degrees. A clear sky tonight, lows around 32. Sunny tomorrow with a high near 52. Sunny on Sunday with a high near 51. Thanksgiving Day, if you really want to take a chance at it, sunny with a high near 31 degrees. It's 6:19 at WRJN. I'm Don Rosen. Back with more in just a moment. Rosen, I want to thank you for joining us. 621 at WRJN. My guest is Chris Paulson, Executive Director of the Racine Heritage Museum. If you want to know where you're going, go talk to a gypsy. She'll tell you the future. If you want to know where you've been, you got to talk to Chris Paulson. He'll tell you exactly where you've been. We're talking about the sports section at the Racine Heritage Museum. The Racine Bells have an exhibit there, of course, the all-women's baseball team. And just remember, there's no crying in baseball. Remember that. If there's one line you're going to take from that movie, it's Tom Hanks. There's no crying in baseball. You have a lot of other sports memorabilia. Plus, you've got an event coming up, speaking about sports memorabilia.
We do. We just came off of our 12th annual induction event, brought in just a great slate of people, but we're looking back to the inaugural class in 2011, and pro baseball player Shane Raleigh is going to be at the museum on Wednesday, the 22nd, from 6 to 8 p.m. He's just published a new book, a kind of a historical fiction piece. It looks just really, really cool. I've just started reading it now. He'll be interviewed by Jerry Tapp. There'll be some Q&A, opportunities for people to come and meet Shane, and some refreshments. It should be a real nice evening, and it's a great way to kick off. If you've got a sports fan in your family and you want to start your Christmas shopping a little early, this is a good time to do it.
And again, the date is the 22nd.
11/22, next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, and we're going to talk about that again before, in case you say, gee, I forgot what he said. We're going to remind you. Don't worry about it. What other sports memorabilia you have there?
We bring in memorabilia from each inductee every single year. So this year, the exhibit has been refreshed with material from the inductees, the wrestler Tony Azarian, and longtime coach, local basketball great Mike Drummond, another local basketball great, Keisha Oliver Hayes, the wrestling coach, our famous wrestling coach Dwayne Clevin, and of course Tony Romo.
Tony Romo, Burlington,
was inducted this year, and so each year we produce a video, a biographical video on each inductee, and then they share material with us for exhibit at the museum during the course of the year until the next induction event.
And here's what's great about history. You'll never run out, because we're creating history every single day on this planet, and what we're doing today will be history tomorrow.
That's exactly what this is about. Each inductee shares something about their life in Racine, and it pulls into you pull in education, you pull in industry, just the whole. It's we call it contemporary history, but it builds our bank of information on the story of this county.
I want to talk about the autos there, but we'll talk about that in the next break, and some of the cars you have on exhibit at the Racine Heritage Museum on Main. Do you have anything from the Progressive Dairy at the museum?
We do. In fact, we're not able to get it in our current building, but we do have a beautiful Progressive Dairy wagon.
I think I saw it there once before. It was on exhibit there.
And we've had that. We get that out when we can. We've had that at the county fair. It's been in the parade. It's been in a variety of different, kind of out and around the community. We are very limited by our space. I think I mentioned the scope of the collection earlier. We live in a 12,500 square foot facility, and we are committed to achieving a new one, a larger, expanded museum. But because we do have cars, we've got boats, we've got tractors. Racine, this county produced everything, and there's some big, wonderful things that we really want to share with people, and we have some challenges in doing that. So, you mentioned cars. We do have a number of cars. We've got a Mitchell. We've got two Mitchells. We've got a Nash produced in Racine.
You mentioned Mitchell. Now you mentioned the Henry Mitchell house before, and you mentioned during the break. You said his family is related to the Mitchell car.
That was the family. They started making wagons in Racine in 1850, and by the time they kind of closed up shop in the early 1920s, they had produced automobiles for a number of years, and even a couple of motorcycles along the way.
Now, I told you, back to Progressive Dairy, I told you my wife found some old milk bottles in the basement the other day, and she was cleaning them out. I think it was the Progressive Dairy. I think that's what was on the bottles. Now, we can donate them to anybody, but I want a little plaque on there from the Rosen Philanthropic Foundation for the Preservation of Racine Artifacts. As long as we got that little plaque.
As long as you got your plaque.
We're fine with it. But people, if our house is over 112, 115 years old, whatever it is, you'd be surprised what you can find in the old homes, because people, put stuff away. People are hoarders by nature, and they put stuff away. And go searching in the basement of your old home. You never know what you're going to find. because people find oddball things all the time, and they think, well, there's no value. And that's why you hear these stories about people going to fairs or flea markets. I bought this painting for $4. Turns out it's worth $400,000. And you hear that all the time. People finding stuff that they think has no value whatsoever, but it does have a value. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of stuff in there that people would think, well, there's no value, but it does have value.
It does have value. And from our standpoint, the value is that things tell stories. And they tell our stories, and so they're very important to us. Just the other night, I was out in the town of Norway. I had the pleasure of kind of giving a little talk to the town board, and former county executive and current town chair, Jane Jacobson, she organized what was the final class reunion of the Racine County Agricultural School, which closed in 1959, I think. And she worked really hard to collect and kind of pull together images and yearbooks and letters and jackets and all kinds of cool things associated with that school, which is such a big part of our community's history. And, until that happened, there'd been very little in the museum's collection. And so this is a brand new, wonderful piece that allows us to kind of tell a really neat slice of history for Racine County that we hadn't been able to tell before with the materials that were just sort of out there.
You also have, and we're going to talk about this after the break, you also have inventions out there. I saw, well, we'll talk about it coming. I'm not going to tell people what I saw. We'll talk about it coming up in a moment, then I'll ruin it. But you do have some beautiful automobiles from a long time ago. They look like Model Ts, for the better description, but they're not. They're from J.I. Case. They're from Mitchell. You have all these things, not all on display. Some are in storage. They come out. We're going to talk more about that coming up with Chris Paulson, Executive Director of the Racine Heritage Museum on Main Street. You got to go there, folks. I'm telling you, you're missing a great day of history at Racine Heritage Museum. Looking for some gradual clearing today with a high near 46 degrees. Right now, a little bit of drizzle, 47. Everybody have fun tonight. It's Friday night, right? Some people have to work tomorrow. I'm Don Rosen, 6:35 on your Friday morning. Looking for a gradual clearing today with a high near 46 degrees tonight. Looks like a clear sky, sunshine tomorrow, sunshine Sunday, and if we're going to stick our necks out, no pun intended, it's Thanksgiving Day, sunny with a high near 31 degrees. My guest is Chris Paulson. He is the Executive Director of a national treasure, at least a Racine treasure, the Racine Heritage Museum. That's a big thing to be entrusted with, the history of Racine, because if something happens to it, it's gone forever. You can't remake it. It's gone. So that's a big responsibility.
Right. I mean, Racine. It's all of Racine County, and it's the core. That's our core objective, is to preserve and maintain the material culture that's associated with the people of Racine County and the things that they accomplished.
I told you before we went on the air, my wife and I were on a road trip, and we passed through Murdo, South Dakota. Murdo, Murdo, South Dakota. Their claim to fame is an auto museum. And if I'm telling you they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars over acres and acres and acres, I'm not exaggerating. It's so much that you can't, after a while, your head's going to explode from all the cars they have there. But one of them caught our eye. It was a J.I. Case car, and I didn't know J.I. Case made cars. Now, it looked, for lack of a better description, it looked like a Model T. It was a black car. Of course, they were all black back then. Black car. It was a Case car. And I said to her, we've got to tell somebody in Racine about this car. They might want it. And it's sitting here in a barn in Murdo, South Dakota. It turns out that the guy who owns the auto museum has a relationship with somebody in Racine. So, I don't know, maybe he told her, I don't know. But you know the car I'm talking about, you're well aware of, right?
I'm well aware of the Case
Case cars, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So they manufactured cars for what years?
1912 to 1927.
Get a little closer. I want to hear.
I'm sorry, 1912 to 1927. The museum actually has in our permanent collection is a 1927 case that's fully restored. We're not able to get it into the building, but we have had it around at different events throughout the county over the past several years. I think we acquired it 6 years ago. It's a beautiful piece. Mm-hmm.
You also have a Mitchell car there.
We do. We have two Mitchells. An early one, a 1905 runabout, and a 1920.
What happened to these cars? Well, why didn't they catch on? Was there? Why don't we hear about people driving the latest Mitchell hybrid or the latest Case hybrid car?
Well, they for a lot of reasons. So in the case of, in terms of Case picked up a company called Pierce that was local, and turned some of their manufacturing into automotive manufacturing. But Case's, kind of core product were agricultural implements, and then later agriculture and, of course, construction down the way. So the cars were not part of their main line of production, with companies like Mitchell. They got to a point where there was a design that was kind of like they called it the drunken Mitchell. It was this sort of awful looking car that came out in the early 1920s, and it just kind of financially killed the company. And so they had to close up shop. They just weren't able to continue. They couldn't sell those cars. They did a couple of years later kind of come out with some more traditional looking models, but just couldn't recover financially from that. Nash was one of, I think it was Wisconsin's biggest employer for a number of years.
The Nash
yes,
Rambler,
right? And and they lasted for a very long time. I mean, that company, they went right through and their legacy companies right through AMC and eventually those Chrysler years. So they just sort of became part of that, part of what is Chrysler now. But I think of course they left the area. They're gone. That's a defunct thing now. But I mean, that was you've got close to a century of production for that. That's a really long life for a company.
There's a song, it was a hit song back in the 60s or late 50s called Beep Beep by the Playmates. And in the song, they mention the little Nash Rambler. So it's immortalized in song. I think Chrysler has a different name now. I think an Italian company. That's with an S. I know when the auto strike was happening, they kept mentioning that.
Yeah, I caught that too, and I can't remember.
I can't remember the name of the company. Where do you get these items for the Racine Heritage Museum? Where do you find them? Or do people come to you?
Well, we do actively seek some elements. In the case of these cars, there were, and he's since passed along, but Bill Lewis and his wife Joe, years ago, 25 years ago, were they're descendants of the Mitchell Lewis families, or he is, and they made the effort to kind of seek out a couple of these cars that were available from other organizations, from, in one case, a museum, and I forget what the source of the other one was, but they made sure that they were purchased for the permanent collection here in Racine.
Oh, that's
and they
great.
wanted to see those things maintained in Racine. The case came from a gentleman down in, I think, Arlington, Virginia, Dr. Leaf, who wanted to see the Case car return to its home, where it was made. And it's a beautifully restored car, and it's eventually going to go on a permanent exhibit. And the Nash, the 1927 Nash, is a unique piece. It's a golfer's coupe, really cool car, produced in Racine, although Nash was largely a Kenosha company, but it was produced in Racine. That was purchased for us by Sam Johnson about 20 years ago.
Talk about some of the innovations and inventions from Racine you have there at the Heritage Museum.
We can see all kinds of things that, we do have a substantial collection of case material. Again, it's big. We're not able to, put it on, exhibition all the time in the museum. But you think about that company here in Racine County, and, that in the early 1840s, along with McCormick and John Deere.
John Deere.
8,000 years of agriculture changes practically overnight, within 5 years. And, and this community has a leadership role in those major technological changes. And, we do have the entire Case Company archive in our collection. We're working through that actually with some really nice support from CNH right now. Racine was the leader in fractional horsepower motors. They were the universal fractional horsepower motor, the little tiny motor that could operate on AC or DC, was invented right here in Racine. And over time, there were some 250 different manufacturers, mostly sort of garage manufacturers, but companies as large as Hamilton Beach and Oster, and others. Andis is still around. They're making, they're in some of their hair cutters, their little fractional horsepower motors in there, multi-products, and other, they're continuing that wonderful tradition. That's something that we've been a world leader in. For a long time, we were the nation's largest luggage producer. And this goes back to, a lot of these things go back to unique skill sets that come from different parts of the world. People come to this area, people who come to this community, and they bring Scottish wheelwrights. The leather workers from the Bohemians that would come to this area that did that really started the luggage industry in Racine, and this constant blending and this unique craftsmanship, and people shared different ideas with each other, and it kind of spins this wonderful story of innovation, invention, and manufacturing that really puts Racine County on the world map. There is we celebrated with my former board chair, worked at Twin Disc. He's recently retired, but did this wonderful story on the 100th anniversary of Twin Disc. And it's amazing to see just the early organization of that company. There is, Percy Batten. There's with who was the first of the Battens that ran the company. But there are, there's S.C. Johnson, the Johnson Company, who invested in this company, and they kind of shared the support for each other. These inventors, these successful manufacturers, often invested in each other and worked with each other to bring about new ideas and bring new products to the market. And that's a tremendous story of manufacturing in this community. It's
Why Racine, though? How did all of this come to Racine? Racine's not the biggest city on the planet. You've got Milwaukee right up the road. You've got Chicago to the south. How did all this come to Racine?
It's in the soil. This community, like so many up and down the lake, starts with wheat producers and wheat shippers. And here in Racine County, we had some very, very, very successful wheat producers, so the west end part of the county. And for a time, we were the fourth or fifth busiest harbor on the Great Lakes, shipping wheat to ports east. Racine was, despite being smaller than other communities, was a leader in the first rail lines that went from here to Janesville. That eventually becomes more associated with Milwaukee and Chicago, but we started it here. It's just an amazingly creative, hardworking people working together to create a very successful economy early on that becomes an attractor for folks looking to start a new life in this country. And it just kind of blossoms through the 1870s, 80s, and well into the 1900s.
What about the Underground Railroad? You have an exhibit for the Underground Railroad, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We have a permanent exhibit on Racine County's role in the Underground Railroad, and thanks to Racine County, we have just installed another 7 markers connecting the story from Racine to Burlington. We're going to do phase 3. There are actually 27 sites around Racine County that are associated with the abolitionist movement. And
by the way, just for people tuning, it's not a real railroad, just so you know.
Right.
It's more. It's not even below ground. No. It's more of It's more of a traveling way that the slaves traveled from the south to the north. Because people say, I didn't know we had an underground subway. No, it's not a railroad. It's not even underground. It's just the word they use to describe it. But go ahead.
I appreciate that. You'd be surprised how often we get asked that. But yeah, it's a movement. But this little corner of Wisconsin played a very significant role in the movement. And we've been able, with our partner organization, the Professional Women's Network for Service, the City of Racine, the County of Racine, and others, really kind of put Racine County on the map as, under the auspices of the National Park Service, where we've got, say, 3 sites now that have, we've been able to achieve sufficient documentation to have their recognition. The National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, and the museum has recognition as a research facility in that network. And that's 2 more than anybody west of Ohio. This is a big deal for us. There were the folks that produced wheat in the West and the folks that shipped it in the East worked together and employed that amazing, the infrastructure that they had created really creatively to help people escape enslavement. So there were, there's loads of documentation of people coming up through into Rochester, Burlington, and then coming to Racine, getting on boats, and being shipped away to ports north.
We are the center of the universe. It helps having the Great Lake right in your backyard, which helps with a lot of this stuff. Yeah. My guest is Chris Paulson. He is the executive director of the Racine Heritage Museum right here on Main Street. It's a treasure. I'm telling you, you got to go over there. I want to talk about, when we come back, you have an event coming up. We'll talk about the book signing, and we'll wrap up with some other items you have at the Racine Heritage Museum. And I want to know about the Civil War training camp right here. We'll talk about that in a moment. Look for gradual clearing today with a high day of 46 degrees. There was some light drizzle. I think it's all done now. 47 degrees in Racine. It's 6:49. I'm Don Rosen. I want to thank you for joining us here this morning at WRJN.
Tonight it's very clear.
My guest is Chris Paulson. He's the executive director of the Racine Heritage Museum. I'm Don Rosen. Thanks for joining us here this morning at WRJN, 1400 AM, 99.9 FM, and 98.1 FM. Talking about history. The station turns on December 6th. In 2 weeks, we'll be 98 years old. 98. And in 2 years, we'll be 100 years old. Maybe you need some artifact stuff at your... at the Heritage Museum at WRJN. Out in the hallway, in the lobby area here, we have a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt in front of a WRJN microphone. The mic flag she's in front of, the mic flag is that little thing that goes over the microphone that says WRJN. The flag is in the lobby. The microphone, I hid in the basement one time because I didn't want anybody getting rid of it. It's a useless piece of, useless microphone, but it was in that picture. And when I came back here, I couldn't find it. And I'm going to search that basement to see if I can find that microphone, because that's Eleanor Roosevelt in front of our microphone. The question is, what was Eleanor Roosevelt doing in front of a WRJN microphone? I want the backstory on that picture is what I want.
I'd like that, too.
What was she doing here? Let's talk about the book signing you've got coming up before I forget.
Sure. Next week, Wednesday night, 6 to 8 p.m., baseball pro great Shane Raleigh, the one of the very first class of inductees to our Racine County Sports Hall of Fame, has a new book out. He'll be in town and here to sign his books, sell the books, and there's going to be a really neat Q&A with our own Jerry Tapp, who kind of a longtime friend and associate, and I guess teammate of Mr. Raleigh. So it should be a really nice evening at the museum. It's free.
I was about to say, admission charge? Free.
No admission. Yeah. No admission. We just love to see you there.
Well, that's fantastic. Give us some of the other exhibits that people might not be aware of at the museum that when you go and say, gee, I didn't know that, because that happens all the time. You say, gee, I didn't know that's from Racine.
Well, we've got Racine County, or Racine was the actually the city part. This is that city story. The is an international center for drum and bugle corps. And we've got this amazing drum and bugle corps history, and there's a brand new exhibit. It was our out of the gate exhibit from the pandemic reopening, so it's only been open a couple of years. It's a really fascinating exhibit. Lots of great stories, uniforms.
I've seen some of those, by the way.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. We've got that going on. We've got an exhibit that kind of talks about Racine's manufacturing history called Factory for the World. We change that up occasionally with new product and different things. Upstairs on the second floor, we do have that Underground Railroad exhibit, but that Underground Railroad exhibit is flanked by two other pieces. One is called Waterways, which talks about some of earlier settlement, some of the indigenous people, who lived in this area along the rivers, but it also, kind of tracks the story of the development of our harbor, shipping, all of those stories, even boat manufacturing, which was done here for quite a long time. Those stories are told in this wonderful exhibit called Waterways, and we have another one called Wheat and People, which is kind of talks about the settlement and development of the sort of the agricultural component of our economy, but we're also updating that now with some support from the Racine Community Foundation over the next year, hopefully, that we are going to really bring in the story of different waves of immigration and kind of update that narrative. But the important part of that is that those two stories, Waterways, Wheat and People, kind of flank that Underground Railroad story and really pull together a total Racine County story that is it's unique in the nation. It's a tremendous story to tell, and it's something that we're just really proud to be able to have at the museum.
I love looking at the before and after pictures. There's a lot on Main Street, but there was a book called, and I'm so bad at names all of a sudden.
The one you mentioned was Grassroots.
Yeah, this is the Racine Concert Band, who just celebrated their 100th anniversary. The band played on it was a history book of the band, and they start with a D.
Yeah, they just celebrated their
100 years. I know.
That's right. We did a little piece on them, or they brought a little exhibit to the museum. It was really cool to see.
And the book is fabulous. Delbert Eiche wrote the book, and in there is our house because way before I lived in it, and you can see it from the early pictures of the band because whoever took the pictures from the beginning of the band on was standing in the same spot, and you could see some of the homes on the Main Street area, and you can see our house on there in some of the pictures. And I asked Dell about it, and he said, well, I actually have the color photograph of that. We used the black and white in the book. So he gave me the color photograph that they actually found.
Oh, neat.
And there's some guy sitting on my porch. What are you doing on my in 1962, he's sitting there. I have the book, and they give away copies at the Racine Concert Band concerts all summer long. It's just wonderful. And you see the old uniforms. These old, heavy, woolen uniforms that they used to march in the 4th of July parade. They probably weighed a ton. They didn't have lightweight fabric back then for some reason. And they had to march for miles in these hot uniforms. And I think it's great that they did it. And nobody fell over during the parade. But there's so much history in this city. Don't let it go by. Bring your children to the Racine Heritage Museum. They may not appreciate it like we do, but I'm telling you, over time they will, because I was telling Chris that when I was a kid, we always went to museums on school trips. I probably didn't appreciate it back then, but I do now. And I remember so many of the things I saw at the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan, the Art Museum in Manhattan. And take your kids, because you never know. You might trigger something in their brain that says, boy, I want to get involved in history. I want to learn more about this stuff. Because before you go forward, you got to learn where you came from. Right. And you guys are doing a great job at that.
Thank you. And there's lots to do for kids there. We do have treasure hunts and little activities and all kinds of stuff. And we do have a very active education program. So, if there's a class or a group that's interested, just please get in touch.
Oh, take field trips there. Do you have a lot of field trips?
We do, and
good.
we do a lot of outreach.
Good. Excellent. Chris Paulson, you're always welcome back here. Chris Paulson's the executive director for the Racine Heritage Museum right there on Main Street at the corner of
7th and Main.
7th and Main. Can't miss, right across from the police lockup. It's right there. A lot of people know where that is. Chris, thank you very much, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving this year.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate being here.
You're always welcome back. Hey, we've got some news headlines from Stuart J. Waddles coming up. We're going to talk Racine Raiders, talk about history. Racine Raiders coming up shortly. We've got movies to talk about in the next hour, what's coming out at theaters, and we're going to talk sports too with Mike Clemens. So it's all straight ahead here at WRJ, and I'm Don Rosen, and I want to thank you for joining us here today on this Friday morning. It's 6:59.